There is a sound a storm makes when it is hiding something. I didn't know that before Alaska. I thought wind was wind. I thought snow was just water that had given up. But on the night of February the 9th, I stood at the window of Observation Station 7, 212 miles from the nearest road, and I watched a wall of white come down out of the dark, and inside it, something was walking. Not blowing. Not drifting. Walking. It was taller than the radio mast. It moved against the wind, which is the part one still can't explain to anyone, because wind doesn't have exceptions. The snow bent around it the way water bends around a stone in a river. And the radio that had been dead silent for 9 hours, clicked on by itself and said, in my own voice, in a recording that did not exist, "Don't log this one." I never told anyone what I saw. That was the rule. That was always the rule. This is what happened in the 4 months before that night. They flew me in on a twin otter with no markings, just a tail number that someone had scrubbed down to a ghost of paint. The pilot didn't talk. That should have been the first thing I noticed, but at the time I thought it was professionalism. Later I understood it was something else. People who flew into Station 7 learned not to ask questions, because the answers made the flight back feel longer. My name doesn't matter for this. I'll tell you what they called me, which was Henning. Last names only at the station. That was procedure, and at first I thought it was just the kind of stiff formality you get in government contract work. We were technically employed by an atmospheric research consortium with a name so generic I forgot it the day I signed. Northern Boundary Layer Monitoring. Long-term climate baseline data. That was the description in the packet. It was the kind of job nobody competes for. 11 months on, 1 month off. No internet outside of a monitored uplink. No personal cameras. A psychological evaluation that took 2 days and asked me 4 separate times whether I had ever experienced perceptual events I could not explain. I said no. I thought it was a stress question. The plane came down on a strip of grated ice, and the cold hit me through the door like a hand pressed flat against my whole body. 40 below. The air had a taste, metal and nothing, like the inside of an empty freezer. The station sat low and gray against the snow, a cluster of prefabricated modules linked by enclosed corridors, with the radio mast and the radar dome rising behind it. Beyond that, in every direction, was the flat white nothing of the North Slope in winter. No trees. No hills worth the name. Just the curve of the earth, and the dark coming down at 2 in the afternoon. The man who met me at the door was named Bex. He was maybe 50, with a face that had been sandpapered by decades of this. He shook my hand without taking off his glove and said, "You'll want to keep moving the first week. Cold gets in if you stand still. Gets in your head, too." I didn't know yet how literally he meant it. Inside, the station was warm in the way that institutional places are warm, overheated, dry, the air pushed around by fans that never stopped. Fluorescent tubes ran the length of every ceiling, and that was the light I lived under for 4 months. There is no window light in the polar winter. There is only the hum and the flicker of those tubes, and after a while your eyes forget what daylight looked like. You start to think the fluorescent buzz is the natural sound of being alive. There were 6 of us. Bex, who ran operations. Aldous, the senior meteorologist, gray and precise, who corrected your grammar in the logbook. A woman named Cray who handled the radar and the satellite downlinks, and who I almost never heard speak above a murmur. A mechanic named Sol who kept the generators and the heating plant alive and who was the only one of us who ever laughed. And a man named Petrov, the other observer, who would become my partner on shift. I'll talk more about Petrov later. I have to be careful with him. I still don't know what I'm describing when I describe him. The routine settled over me fast, the way routine does when there's nothing to push against it. We worked in 12-hour shifts. Mine ran from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning, which in February meant darkness on both ends and darkness in the middle. My job was simple and almost soothing in its repetition. Every hour on the hour, I walked the instrument line. We had a string of sensors mounted on a 40-foot tower behind the main module, temperature at 3 heights, Wind speed and direction, barometric pressure, humidity, a few things I never fully understood. I'd read them, log them by hand in a paper book even though they were also recorded electronically, and radio the summary to Cray, who compiled it. Then I'd come back inside, thaw out, and do it again 60 minutes later. That was it. That was the whole job, most nights. Read the numbers. Write the numbers. Say the numbers. Survive the cold for the 8 minutes it took to do it. The cold was the first thing that taught me to be afraid, and it was an honest fear, the kind that makes sense. At 40 and 50 below, the world wants you dead in a clean, uncomplicated way. You learn the rules fast. You never let skin touch metal. You breathe through a cloth so your lungs don't frost. You count your fingers when you come back in, actually count them, because frostbite doesn't always announce itself. The station gave us a printed card of survival procedures, laminated, hanging by every exterior door. I read it so many times the words stopped being words. In retrospect, I should have paid more attention to the procedures that didn't make sense. There was one, near the bottom of the card, under a heading that just said storm conditions. Most of it was ordinary: secure the doors, account for all personnel, do not attempt to reach the instrument tower in winds over a certain speed. But the last line read, in the event of an unlisted system, do not visually monitor. Do not log. Await all clear from operations. I asked Aldous what an unlisted system was, my second night. He didn't look up from his screen. He said, "A storm we don't name." I waited for him to explain why a storm wouldn't get a name. He didn't. After a while it became clear he wasn't going to, and that the silence wasn't rudeness. It was a door he had closed a long time ago and didn't open for new people. I let it go. Everybody lets it go, at first. That's the thing about a place like that. The wrongness is small and the cold is large, and you spend all your attention on the cold. The loneliness came in slowly, like the frost on the inside of the window seals. The first week I still felt like a visitor. By the third week the outside world had gone flat in my memory, the way a song you can't quite hum goes flat. I'd think about my apartment in Spokane, my sister, the coffee place on the corner, and it all had the texture of something I'd read about rather than lived. Cray told me, in one of her rare full sentences, that this was normal. The brain economizes, she said. Out here there's nothing to spend it on. So it stops keeping the receipts. I laughed. She didn't. We didn't talk much, the six of us. Meals were quiet. There was a common room with a few worn-out paperbacks and a chess set missing 2 pawns, and a television that only played a rotating stock of DVDs none of us watched anymore. Mostly people kept to their shifts and their bunks. It wasn't unfriendly. It was just that the place pressed a kind of quiet onto you, the same way the cold pressed in. You learned to move slow and say little and keep your eyes on your own work. But I started to notice things. Small things at first. I noticed that Petrov, my shift partner, never logged the 2 o'clock reading on certain nights. He'd take the reading, I'd watch him walk the line, but when I checked the book later, the 2 o'clock slot would be blank, with a small mark in the margin that I eventually realized was the same mark every time. A short horizontal line with a dot above it. I asked him about it once. He said, "Equipment fault. Cray knows." And the way he said it was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost didn't notice it was the third time that week the equipment had faulted at exactly 2 in the morning. I noticed that the logbook had pages missing. Not torn out, that would have been obvious. The page numbers ran continuously, but the dates skipped. February the 3rd went straight to February the 5th. When I flipped back to January, before my time, I found the same thing in 3 places. Whole days that simply weren't there, with no gap in the binding, no sign anyone had removed anything. It was as if those days had been logged in a different book, or had never happened, or had happened in a way that didn't get to be written down. I noticed that on the nights the 2 o'clock reading went missing, the heating plant ran louder. Sol's domain, the generators and the boilers, sat in a module at the far end of the station, and on most nights you could feel its rhythm in the floor like a slow pulse. But on certain nights the pulse changed, sped up, deepened, as if the station were working harder to stay warm than the temperature required. I checked the outside readings against my own logs later. The cold on those nights was no worse than usual. There was no reason for the plant to strain. And I noticed the silence. Not the ordinary silence of an isolated place. A different kind. On most nights the wind never fully stopped. There was always a hiss, a movement of air across the snow, the small sounds of a station breathing. But sometimes, for a few minutes, all of it would cut out at once. The wind, the fans, the hum of the lights. No, the lights kept humming, but everything outside the walls went dead. A silence so complete that my ears would ring, reaching for something to hear. It never lasted long. 2 minutes, maybe 3. And then the world would come back, all at once, like a held breath let go. The first time it happened I went to the window. There was nothing out there but snow and the dark and the faint red blink of the warning light on top of the radar dome. But I had the distinct feeling, and I know how this sounds, that the snow had stopped falling and was simply hanging in the air, waiting, the way a room goes still when someone is standing behind you. Then the wind came back, and the snow fell, and I told myself I was tired. I was tired. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth, and somewhere underneath the tiredness I had already started to understand that Station 7 was not only listening to the weather. It was listening for something. And the difference between those two things would take me the rest of the winter to feel all the way down to the bottom. There is a particular cruelty in noticing a pattern slowly. If the wrongness had hit me all at once, I could have rejected it, said that's impossible, and held the line. But it came in increments, each one small enough to absorb, and by the time the picture was complete I had already accepted every piece of it. That's how they do it, I think. That's how anyone does it. You don't break a person's reality with a hammer. You let the temperature drop 1 degree at a time until they're frozen and never notice the change. The missing logs were the first thread I followed. I started keeping my own notebook, a small one, the kind you'd buy for a grocery list, that I kept in the inside pocket of my parka where it stayed warm against my chest. In it I wrote down everything the official log left out. The blank 2 o'clock readings. The skip dates. The nights the heating plant strained. I wasn't being a detective. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to crack a case. I was doing the thing a person does when their environment stops making sense. I was trying to build a record I could trust, because I had started to not trust the records around me. And if I'm honest, because I had started to not fully trust my own memory. That was the part that scared me most. The memory. It began with small slips. I'd finish the midnight reading, come inside, hang up my parka, and then find the reading already logged in the book in my own handwriting, but I had no memory of writing it. The numbers were right. The handwriting was mine, down to the way I crossed my sevens. But the act of writing it was simply gone, a clean absence where a memory should have been. The first time, I assumed I'd done it on autopilot. We all run on autopilot in a routine. But it kept happening. And it only happened on certain nights. The same nights the 2 o'clock reading went missing, the same nights the plant ran loud, the same nights the silence came. I started to think of them as the bad nights. I could feel one coming, eventually. There was a pressure to them, a thickness in the air inside the station, even before anything happened. Sol felt it too. He never said so directly, but on the bad nights he'd stay up past his shift, sitting in the generator module with the door open, watching the gauges. Once I asked him why. He said, "Plant likes company when it's working hard." Then he looked at me for a second too long and said, "You're new. You'll learn when to stay inside." The radio was the second thread. Our communications ran through a single uplink, a satellite link for the official reports, and a low-frequency radio set for local use and for contact with the supply depot and the 2 other stations in our network, which we knew only as Station 4 and Station 11. We never met those people. We only heard their voices, thin and crackling, reading their own numbers into the same dark we were reading ours into. There was a strange comfort in it, knowing there were others out there doing the same small ritual. Like hearing a far-off church bell and knowing someone else is awake. But the radio started doing things. The static was the first sign. Static is normal on a low-frequency set, especially in the polar night with the aurora playing havoc overhead. But our static developed a rhythm. It would rise and fall in a slow, even cycle, in for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, like breathing, and underneath it, if you turn the gain up, there was something that was almost a voice. Not words. Just the shape of a voice, the cadence of someone speaking very far away in a language with no hard consonants. Cray heard it too. I know she did, because one night I caught her at the radio set with the gain turned all the way up and her head tilted, listening, and when she saw me she turned it down fast and said, "Atmospheric. The cold does it." But her hand was shaking. Then there were the transmissions that came at the wrong times. Station 4 and 11 reported on a fixed schedule, top of every 6th hour. But sometimes, on the bad nights, the radio would crackle to life off schedule, and a voice would read a weather summary that didn't match any pattern. The numbers were wrong in a specific way I only understood after I started writing everything down. They were our numbers, the readings I had taken hours earlier, or in one case, the readings I would take an hour later. I logged a barometric pressure at 3 a.m., and at 2 a.m. the radio had already read it back to me in a voice that was not quite Petrov's and not quite mine. I sat with that for a long time. I am still sitting with it. I tried to talk to Petrov about the radio. This is where I have to tell you about Petrov, and I have to do it carefully, because everything I knew about him turned out to be a surface stretched over a shape I couldn't see. He was a good partner, on the surface. Quiet, capable, never complained about the cold. We shared the long dark hours of the night shift, and developed the kind of wordless rhythm two people develop when they do the same dangerous work side by side. He'd take the even hour readings, I'd take the odd. We'd pass each other in the corridor with a nod. He made coffee that was too strong and I drank it anyway. For the first month, he was the closest thing I had to a friend out there. But there were things. He never seemed cold. I'd come in from the instrument line with my face raw and my hands shaking, and he'd come in 2 minutes later, having done the same walk, perfectly composed, no frost on his eyelashes, his breathing even. At 40 below, your body does things you can't fake. Petrov didn't do them. I told myself he was just hardened to it, an old hand. But I watched him, after that, the way you watch something you've decided not to be afraid of yet. He didn't sleep on the same schedule as the rest of us, or maybe at all. Our bunks were in a shared module, thin partitions between them, and I never once heard him sleep. No breathing, no shifting, no snore. His bunk was always made. I'd see him at the start of the night shift and at the end, and in the off hours when I'd wake to use the head, I'd hear him moving somewhere in the station, slow and unhurried, in the dark. And his face. I'm going to try to say this plainly, because the plain version is the one that keeps me up. His face was correct. Every feature was where it should be. But sometimes, in the fluorescent flicker, when he wasn't speaking, his face had the quality of a photograph of a face rather than a face, perfectly still, the small involuntary movements absent, the eyes not quite tracking the way living eyes track. It would last only a moment. Then he'd blink, and smile, and be Petrov again, and I'd feel like a paranoid fool. I told myself it was the lighting. I told myself a lot of things that winter. The night I asked him about the radio, we were on shift together, and the static had been doing its slow breathing for an hour. I said, "You hear that? The rhythm in it?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't listen to the spaces between." I asked him what that meant. He said, "The static's not the thing. The thing is in the spaces. If you listen to the spaces, it knows you're listening." He said it the way you tell someone not to touch a hot stove, flat, practical, no drama. Then he went back to his log. I laughed, because what else do you do? He didn't. That was the night I started to understand that the others weren't ignoring the wrongness. They were managing it. There were procedures for it. The laminated card was only the public version. There was a whole second layer of behavior, unwritten, passed down through how people moved and what they didn't say. The way Sol kept the plant company. The way Cray turned the gain down fast. The way Aldous never let a new person finish a question about unlisted systems. The way Petrov knew not to listen to the spaces. They had all learned to live with something, and the learning had cost them something I could see in their faces but couldn't name. And then there was the night I heard it outside. It was a bad night. I'd felt the pressure building since sundown. The 2 o'clock reading went missing. The plant ran loud. I went out for the 3 a.m. walk and the silence was waiting for me. The wind died the instant I stepped through the door, all at once, like a sound engineer cutting a track. The snow hung in the air. And in that ringing dead quiet, from somewhere out in the white dark beyond the instrument tower, I heard footsteps in the snow. Slow ones? Heavy. The squeak and crunch of a foot pressing down into deep cold snow, then lifting, then the next. Coming closer. I stood frozen at the base of the tower with my flashlight in my hand, and I did not turn the flashlight toward the sound, because some animal part of me knew with total certainty, that I did not want to see what was making it. The card said, "Do not visually monitor." I understood, finally, that this was not a bureaucratic instruction. It was a survival procedure written by someone who had learned the hard way. The footsteps stopped about 30 feet out. I could not see anything. The flashlight only lit a cone of falling snow that had started moving again. And then a voice, close, conversational, right at the edge of the light, said my name. Henning. It was Petrov's voice. Exactly Petrov's voice. But Petrov was inside. I had left him at the radio set 90 seconds earlier. And the voice had come from out there, in the snow, from the place where the footsteps had stopped. I did not answer. I did not move. I stood there until the wind came back all at once and the silence broke, and then I walked back to the door without running, because running felt like the kind of thing that would make it follow, and I went inside, and Petrov was sitting at the radio set exactly where I'd left him, and he looked up at me and said, "You're white as the snow." "What happened?" I said. "Equipment fault." And I'd put the little mark in the margin of my own notebook. The horizontal line with the dot above it. I don't know why I did it. It felt like the right thing. It felt like a thing I'd always known how to do. That scared me more than the voice. The storm that should not have existed announced itself first as a problem with the math. Cray ran the radar and the satellite downlinks, and she was, of everyone at the station, the most precise. She spoke in numbers when she spoke at all. So when she came into the common room one evening at the start of my shift and stood in the doorway with a printout in her hand, not saying anything, I knew something had broken in a way she didn't have numbers for. She gave the printout to Aldous. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "When?" 40 hours, she said. "Maybe less." "It's not moving like weather." I asked to see it. Aldous hesitated, then handed it over, which surprised me. He'd never shared the satellite data before. It was a pressure map of the North Slope and the Beaufort Sea. I'd seen dozens of them by then. I'd learned to read the isobars, the tight rings of a deep low, the way a storm organizes itself around a center. This one was wrong. The center wasn't a center. The isobars didn't ring it. They bent away from it, the way the snow had bent around the walking shape, the way water bends around a stone. There was a hole in the pressure where there should have been a low, an absence with weather curving around it, and the absence was moving toward us against the prevailing flow, the way the shape had walked against the wind. "That's a sensor error," I said. "That can't be a real system." "It's not a system," Aldous said. "That's why it doesn't get a name." And then he did something he had never done. He looked at me, really looked for the first time since I'd arrived, and there was something in his face that I can only call pity. He said, "You should have rotated out last month. They held you over. I told them not to hold over the new ones for this." He folded the printout and put it in his pocket. "Stay inside when it comes. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, you stay inside." The next 40 hours were the slow tightening of everything I'd been half noticing into something I could no longer pretend not to see. The equipment started lying. Not failing, lying. The temperature sensors at the 3 heights on the tower began reading values that made no physical sense. The sensor at 30 feet reading colder than the sensor at 10 feet by a margin that the atmosphere doesn't allow, then reversing, then the readings sliding smoothly through impossible numbers as if some hand were turning a dial. The barometer needle developed a tremor. The radar, Cray told me in one of her longest speeches of the winter, had started returning echoes from inside the station, solid returns, moving, from the corridors and the modules where there was nothing but us. "It thinks there's something in here," she said. "The radar thinks there's something walking around in here with us." She said it flatly, the way she said everything. Then she went back to her screen and didn't speak again for 2 days. The others changed as the storm approached. This was the part one hadn't expected and the part that frightened me in a way the equipment couldn't. They got quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of the station, a deeper one, a withdrawal. Sol stopped laughing. Aldous stopped correcting my grammar in the log. They moved through the corridors with their eyes down and their shoulders set, like men walking into a wind that wasn't there yet. At meals nobody ate much. Nobody looked at the windows. There was a procedure for that too, I realized. The blinds on the exterior windows came down, all of them, drawn by someone in the night, and nobody mentioned it, and nobody raised them again. I found the hidden records on the second night, during the bad hours, when I couldn't sleep and the pressure in the station was a physical weight on my chest. There was a storage module off the main corridor, locked, that I'd assumed held spare parts. The lock was a simple one, and the key hung on the board in operations with all the others, unmarked but obvious by elimination. I told myself I was looking for a working barometer to replace the one that had started trembling. That was a lie I told myself in real time, and I knew it was a lie, and I went in anyway. Inside were the records. The real ones. Not the climate baseline data we sent up the satellite link, the other set, the one that explained the missing pages and the blank 2 o'clock readings. Logbooks going back decades, the older ones water-stained and brittle. And they were not weather logs. Or they were, but the weather was incidental. They were observation logs. Observations of the unlisted systems. I only had time to read a few before I heard movement in the corridor and put everything back. But a few was enough. The entries were terse, procedural, written by a dozen different hands across 40 years, all of them trained into the same flat style. 0214, unlisted system contact. Personnel accounted for. Subject transited NE to SW perimeter. Do not visually monitor maintained. Auditory contact, footfall, vocalization. Vocalization matched voice of observer Henning. That last one stopped my heart, because it was dated 3 weeks before I had arrived at Station 7. There was a name in the logs that recurred. Not a person's name, a designation the station used for the thing, or things, inside the storms. They called it, in the logs, the resident. Never explained. Never described. The entries treated it the way you treat a known hazard with known behaviors. The way you'd log the movements of a bear that lived near the station, if the bear could speak in your voice and walk against the wind and leave no tracks in the snow. The procedures all flowed from one principle, stated once, in the front of the oldest book in a faded hand: it learns by being perceived. Minimize perception. Do not name it. Do not record what it shows you. What is unobserved cannot be confirmed, and what cannot be confirmed cannot fully arrive. I understood, then, why the storms were censored. Why certain readings went unlogged. Why the official record skipped days. It wasn't a cover-up in the ordinary sense, not a secret being kept from the public. It was a containment procedure. The censorship was the containment. Every unrecorded storm, every blank in the logbook, every name withheld, was a way of starving the thing of the perception it fed on. The station's real job was not to watch the storms. It was to refuse to watch them, carefully, so that the watching itself didn't make them real. And I had been writing everything down. In my little notebook, against my chest. Every reading. Every footstep. Every voice in the snow. I had been keeping the most detailed perceptual record at Station 7 in 40 years, and the storm that should not exist was 40 hours out, and closing against the wind. I want to tell you I burned the notebook. I want to tell you I understood the danger and did the same thing. But by then the line between the procedures I'd been taught and the procedures that had been put into me had gone soft. When I tried to throw the notebook into the heating plant's intake, my hand wouldn't open. I stood in the generator module with Sol watching me from across the room, and I held the notebook over the intake, and my hand simply would not let go, and Sol said, very gently, the kindest thing anyone said to me that whole winter. It doesn't want you to. That's how you know it's already reading over your shoulder. The storm arrived on the night of February the 9th, the night I told you about at the start. It came in slow. That was the worst part. A real storm hits with the front, a sudden drop in temperature, a wind that arrives like a door slamming. This came the way evening comes, a gradual thickening, the dark getting darker, the snow getting closer, the world contracting around the station until the red warning light on the radar dome was the farthest thing I could see, and then the snow ate that too. By midnight there was nothing outside the windows but white moving against black, and the blinds were down anyway, so even that was second-hand, a glow at the edges of the blinds that pulsed in a slow rhythm. In and out. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds out. The same rhythm as the static. The same rhythm as the storm's pulsing glow at the window. The same rhythm, I realized with a cold that had nothing to do with the air, as breathing. The radio stopped pretending around 1 a.m. It had been doing its slow, static breathing for hours. Then, all at once, it cleared, perfectly clear, no static at all, which never happens on that set in those conditions, and Station 4 came on the air. Or something using Station 4's call sign. It read a weather summary. The numbers were mine, the ones I would take at 2 a.m., an hour before I took them. And then the voice paused, and changed, and said conversationally, in my own voice this time, the recording I described to you at the start. Don't log this one. Petrov was beside me at the set. I turned to him. And here is the thing I have to tell you about Petrov, the thing the title of all this promised, and the thing I have been circling because I still don't understand it. He was not afraid. Everyone else at the station, by that night, was operating at the far edge of their composure. Cray hadn't spoken in 2 days. Aldous had the gray look of a man at a funeral. Sol sat in the generator module with the door shut. But Petrov was calm. Calmer than calm. He sat at the radio with that photographed stillness on his face, and when the voice said don't log this one, he reached over and turned the gain down, slowly, and he said to me, It's almost here. You should go to your bunk and stay there. Don't come out until I tell you. Whatever you hear in here. Whatever you hear in here. Not out there. In here. I asked him what he was going to do. He looked at me, and for just a moment his face did the thing it did, the stillness, the eyes not tracking, and then it resolved, and it wasn't Petrov's resolution. It was something wearing the shape of Petrov's calm. He said, The same thing I do every time. I talk to it so it talks to me instead of to the rest of you. He paused. It came for me a long time ago, on a different slope, in a different storm. I'm what's left. The station knows. That's why I'm here. That's the job nobody writes down. I don't know how much of that was true. I don't know if it was Petrov telling me a terrible thing or the thing in the storm using Petrov to tell me a comforting one. That uncertainty is the whole shape of what happened to me out there, and it's the shape I've never been able to set down. I went to my bunk. I did the same thing for once, the thing I was told. I lay in the dark in the overheated module with the fluorescent hum and the slow pulse at the edges of the blinds, and I listened, against every instinct, to the spaces between the sounds. And in the spaces, I heard Petrov talking. Not words. The shape of words, the cadence of a conversation, a back and forth, Petrov's voice and another voice that was also Petrov's voice answering it, the two of them going back and forth in the dark in the language with no hard consonants, the language I'd heard under the static. It went on for a long time. The plant ran loud enough to feel in the bunk frame. The pulse at the window slowed. And then, around the hour I've never been able to place because my watch read 3 different times when I looked at it 3 times, the silence came, the total silence, the wind cut clean, the fans and the hum gone, and in that silence I heard, from somewhere in the station, from the corridor right outside my module, the slow, heavy crunch of footsteps in snow. There was no snow in the corridor. The corridor was a sealed, heated, carpeted tube. But I heard boots pressing down into deep cold snow, lifting, the next step, coming down the corridor toward my door, and I heard, over the footsteps, the laminated card's instruction in Aldous' voice and my own voice and Petrov's voice all at once: do not visually monitor, do not log, do not name it. The footsteps stopped outside my door. And a voice, close, gentle, right at the seam of the door, said my name. Not Petrov's voice this time. My own. My exact voice, saying my own name from the other side of the door, the way you'd say it to wake someone gently. Henning. I did not answer. I did not open my eyes. I lay there and I did the only procedure I had left, the one I finally understood. I refused to perceive it. I did not picture it. I did not give it a shape in my mind. I emptied myself out and made myself a blank page, an unlogged hour, a missing date in the book, and I held that nothing for as long as it stood outside my door, which was either 2 minutes or the entire rest of the winter. Then the wind came back all at once. The fans. The hum. The silence broke. And the footsteps were gone, and so was the storm. In the morning, if you can call the perpetual dark a morning, the storm had passed and the readings were normal, and the blinds came up and nobody mentioned any of it. Petrov was at the breakfast table. He looked tired in an ordinary way, which I had never seen on him before, the way a man looks tired who has done something heavy and lived. He didn't speak to me about the night. None of them did. The official log for February the 9th read, in my own handwriting that I don't remember producing, routine operations. No significant weather. Personnel accounted for. And in the margin, beside it, the small mark, the horizontal line with the dot above. I had made it. I must have made it. The satellite report we sent up the link that day carried no mention of any storm at all. As far as the official record of the world is concerned, nothing happened on the North Slope on the night of February the 9th. The pressure map with the hole in it was gone from Cray's files. When I asked her about it, she looked at me with no recognition at all and said, "What map?" And I could not tell whether she was lying to protect me or whether the night had simply been unlogged out of her too, refused into non-existence by the procedure that kept us alive. I rotated out 3 weeks later. They put me on the same unmarked Twin Otter and the same silent pilot flew me south, and as we climbed away I looked back at Station 7, gray and low against the white, the radar dome with its red light blinking its slow 4-second pulse, and I felt the place let go of me the way a current lets go of you at the edge of the sea, reluctantly, and not all the way. Here is what I have left, and why I'm telling you, against every procedure I was taught. My notebook came home with me. I never managed to destroy it. It's in a drawer in a house I'll let you assume is somewhere ordinary. Most of it reads like the obsessive log of a tired man in a hard place. Temperatures, pressures, the small derangements of equipment in extreme cold. But there are pages in my own handwriting that I did not write. Entries in the flat procedural style of the hidden records, in a hand that crosses its sevens the way I cross mine, describing things I have no memory of seeing. And the last entry, dated the night of February the 9th, written in handwriting that is almost mine but slightly, terribly off, the letters too still, too even, the way Petrov's face was too still, says only this. Subject transited. Observer Henning perceived but did not confirm. Containment maintained. Resident did not fully arrive. Will return with next unlisted system. Henning rotated out. Note, resident has Henning's voice now. Recommend Henning not be brought back. Recommend Henning not be allowed to remember he was useful. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know if I'm the man who came home or a missing date in a book that someone forgot to remove. Most nights I'm sure I'm fine. But sometimes, in the deep part of the night, the wind outside my window will stop all at once, every car, every branch, every ordinary sound cut clean, and the snow, if it's snowing, will hang in the air, waiting, the way a room goes still when someone is standing behind you. And in that silence, from somewhere just outside I'll hear it, Slow footsteps in snow that isn't there. Coming closer. Stopping. And my own voice, gentle, from the other side of the wall, saying my own name. I never answer. I lie there and I make myself a blank page, an unlogged hour, a missing date, and I refuse to perceive it, and I wait for the wind to come back. It always comes back. So far.